I wanted to talk to you about Joseph Rael, Beautiful Painted Arrow, and some of his mystical teachings. If you don't know about him, he's a native person from the southwest area of the United States. In 1983, he had a vision to build peace chambers. There have been peace chambers built all over the world now. And Joseph also brought forward many books on his teachings and a number of dances, ceremonial type dances that are based on his own inspirations for people to realize who they are as carriers of the divine being. So what I wanted to talk about now is the way that inspiration works, because the way of inspiration and living in inspiration are really the gateways or the main enablers for a mystic to go on through their life and to live on planet Earth. But before we get to inspiration, the core belief or the core orientation that nearly all mystics all over the world have, regardless of tradition, is to recognize that everything is vibration. And in fact, in Tiwa, Joseph's tradition and his language, the word for people, his people, all people, is vibration. And if we were to look at other Native American beliefs and talk about other beings as being people, the deer people, the tree people, rock, stone people, that all of these peoples are beings that are holding on to a certain vibration. So everything is vibration. And when you have that orientation that everything is vibration, it begins to lift you from the mental constraints and, if you will, the box that modern science has put around things, that everything is just matter and all objects are inanimate and so on, even to the point where consciousness itself is just a byproduct of the chemistry of the brain. But if you look at things from the way of vibration, then it frees you from being constrained to thinking about things in boxes and to think about how things relate to one another, because relationship is another of the keys to living a mystical life and a life that's real and has insights and inspirations. So with this kind of brief orientation, I wanted to get into inspiration itself, because inspiration is the vehicle or the pipeline or the conduit from which all of Joseph's teaching has originated. And the way it works, there's some words in Tiwa, some concepts in Tiwa that are actually shared across many traditions that would be helpful for us to look at. So inspiration, where would you go on the planet if you wanted inspiration? You could certainly go to a beautiful spot, the ocean, forest, etc. But if we think about a lot of the mythologies and the stories about the holy people, the sacred ones who went somewhere for inspiration or went to meet God or went to meet the deity, where they went was up on a mountain, fasting and praying, and even hills. If there aren't mountains around, hills are also used as places. So there's an idea of going above or going up, because in a sort of simplistic symbolism, we start by thinking that God is up, that God is out there, before we realize that God is everywhere, especially inside of us. So how this relates to Tiwa and inspiration is that when you think about a mountain, what's the temperature usually like there? It's colder. So inspiration is thought of as being cold. And as a symbol of that, I could look at a quartz crystal here. And this crystal is very beautiful, it's very transmissive, has a well-defined structure. And you could even say, well, I could look at the forms, the structures inside the crystal, and I could get some inspirations. That's certainly something that you could do. I see rainbows in this one. And inspiration is cold, even in the Buddhist tradition. If you can think of inspirations being certain forms, like this crystal, then what we can do is to seek a place where things are cold. And that place could be at the top of a mountain, or that place can be in the head. If primarily you're intellectual, then your thoughts can be very analytical, and it can be very cold. So what we do in the mystical lineage, and especially see this in a lot of Joseph's dances, is that we need to balance the inspiration. You can think of obtaining inspiration or seeking inspiration as being like a trek, a sacred pilgrimage. And what you need to do on any shamanic journey, mystical journey, is typically you're going for something. But once you have found what you're looking for, you bring it back to the people. So in many of Joseph's dances, there are alternating periods of effort. And Joseph, in his tradition, says that work is worship. So what we do is we balance the inspiration, just the purely intuitive things that we might receive, or the intellectual things we receive, and we can get those when we're still. We need to balance those with movement. So you see this in many of Joseph's dances, especially the sun-moon dance, where you have a period of activity, where the body warms up, you exercise, you dance, and then you alternate that with a period of rest, with a period of cooling. And what happens is, in the period of cooling, the mind opens itself up to inspirations. It opens itself up to new possibilities, insights. You can think of great scientific discoveries. Just that flash of an insight that someone had, that's an inspiration. And for that inspiration to really have an impact on the planet, typically there's a product or an interaction that needs to occur. I can have wonderful ideas, wonderful inspirations all day, just like in 1983 when Joseph had the inspiration to build the peace chambers, but then you need to build the peace chambers. You need to carry out the inspiration. And actually that's another Tiwa maxim, is if you've been given an inspiration, it's your job or your function, your responsibility to carry it out, to bring it into manifestation. Well, in Joseph's dances and in practical ways in our world, how we can take an inspiration and carry it out is to move, to create. And in the dances you see this, like in the sun-moon dance I mentioned, there'd be a period of rest followed by a period of movement. And what the movement does is it takes that inspiration and it works it into your being. It takes the new aspects, the parts of yourself, because really that's what an inspiration is. It's just like light can reflect off of this crystal, or light reflecting off a diamond. An inspiration is not just some objective idea. It's an aspect of your being that you've seen reflected in the environment or coming down from the heavens. Remember, to a mystic, all things are vibration. And really, if we go deeper, all things are aspects of yourself. They're reflections of you, of the human condition. So when we receive an inspiration, we catch a glimpse of something. But to actualize it, to manifest it, we need to do something. We need to work it. We need to, in the dances, we move our bodies. And what happens is we take that cold inspiration and it's come into our being, and we physically heat our body up through effort. And what that does is, like a vaccine or like vitamins, that inspiration now comes and moves through our being. Because if we were just getting inspirations and we didn't do anything with them, if we were just static, then there really isn't a whole lot that inspiration can do to become manifest into the world, or to help with the unfoldment of being. But if we move our body and heat things up, then what happens is we allow or give an opportunity for that inspiration to become real. So that's what inspiration is. And the process of inspiration is to go to where things are cold. And even if you think about this, in the wintertime, it's December now here, 2012. And in the wintertime, things get cold. And if you can imagine that when it snows, that all those ice crystals coming down to the earth that cover the earth in a blanket, it's easy to see that blanket as a blanket of purity. But lately I've begun to see those snowflakes, those crystals coming down as inspirations from the heavens. And it's no coincidence that for many native tribes and the Tiwa people, the winter time is the time for storytelling. It's because the earth has moved into the vibration of inspiration. And we become attuned with the earth, and we are able to pick up those inspirations in the ancient stories. So, through storytelling in the winter, the inspirations that one generation had realized are passed down to the new generation, to the young ones, so that they too can have something seeded in them. And then as the seasons of the earth change and they move into spring and summer, those ideas are planted into the earth, into the psyche of the community. And then through the effort in summer, something new, something that was deposited back in winter is manifested as something new. So I'm inviting you to see that this whole process of inspiration is a larger process that interacts with the earth in the timing of seeking inspirations and telling stories in the winter. And that just like in the dances, when we're moving and working our bodies and using effort, that the earth is using effort in the summer too, to take the inspirations that have come down from the heavens and the snow and the ice and all of the cold things that have come down to the earth to really seed the planet in a metaphysical way in the winter. And the earth wakes up in the spring and takes those inspirations and works them into the soil and works them into the roots and works them up into the trunks and the stems and the leaves. And then something new that was seeded in the winter goes through the cycle. And then the water evaporates again and the cycle continues. So that's some insight into the way of the Tiwa, into the way of looking at life, the metaphors of the mountain and cold, the head being cold, thoughts can be cold. And the warm part of the body, if you haven't figured it out yet, that balances the head, that balances those cold thoughts, is the heart. And we really need, especially in our society today, our planetary society on the earth, we really need people to focus on their hearts. Because we're very good at the analytical, but the heart is not so much right now. So I encourage you to learn more about Joseph's dances, his teachings. He's got a lot of great books. And to look for other communities that are doing ceremonial dance. There's a lot of groups that have been trained and authorized or approved by Native peoples. And there's the Native peoples themselves. There's no substitute for that. And also check out Dances of Universal Peace. That's something I feel is very helpful to understand this process of inspiration and how to live from your heart.